Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're tackling something really fascinating, I think. We're trying to unpack how a national image gets built, how it evolves, and frankly, how it's defended, especially now in this digital age.
Right, and our case study is a big one, the Pakistan Army. We've got some really interesting source material that tracks their media strategy over, more than half a century?
Exactly. It's a crucial mission for us today because it gets to the heart of modern statecraft, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, the core idea from our sources is pretty stark when you think about it.
Which is?
That wars today, well, they aren't just fought on battlefields anymore, they're fought on screens. Your TV screen, your phone screen, your social media feed.
Perception becomes the battleground.
Precisely. The leadership, certainly in this case study, seemed to grasp pretty early on that perception isn't just, a soft power thing. It actually shapes reality. In many ways, perception is power.
Okay, so our job then is to trace how that understanding played out. How did the tools change, moving from, say, state radio?
Yeah, a single source initially.
To the absolute chaos of today's digital world, all those platforms, instantaneous feedback.
It's a massive leap. And the core thesis tying it all together from what we're seeing in the material.
It seems to be that narratives weren't just stories. They were deliberately chosen, almost like weapons, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Weapons wielded very specifically to protect Pakistan's image, both at home for the domestic audience and, crucially, on the world stage.
And it wasn't a static thing, was it? That's what's so interesting.
Not at all. Our sources lay out 4 really distinct eras, 4 different leaders, 4 different media landscapes.
Right.
And you see the strategies, the actual tools they used pivot dramatically from print and state TV, then adapting to global news networks, and now it's all about digital strategies, countering what they call hybrid warfare.
But through all that change, the fundamental goal
remains the same: safeguard the narrative, protect the national story. That's the constant thread.
So to really understand that constant mission, we have to go back to the beginning. Where did this strategic image building actually start?
We have to start with Ayub Khan. Field Marshal Ayub Khan, that's where the foundation is laid.
Okay, let's dive into that first segment, the foundation. Right, Field Marshal Ayub Khan. This is the late 50s, 1960s.
Exactly. And if you're looking for a time when message control was, relatively speaking, simpler, this is it.
Why simpler? What was the media landscape like back then?
Well, think about it. You had a much more centralized system. State resources were dominant. And crucially, technology like television wasn't widespread yet. Radio had reach, but it was state radio.
So fewer channels, less noise, easier to push a single message.
Much easier. And that centralization was the key strategic advantage. The sources make it clear under Ayub the goal wasn't just reporting news. It was about strategically crafting and projecting a very specific image.
And that image was?
Discipline, progress, modernity. A nation on the rise, gaining strength. And the state media apparatus was basically the only game in town to deliver that message.
So what were the specific tools? You mentioned state radio.
Radio Pakistan was huge, yeah. Especially for reaching across a geographically diverse country. But the really big development was PTV, Pakistan Television.
Ah, the visual.
Exactly. The first time they could project a unified, modern look nationwide. Think about the impact television had back then. It was new, it felt authoritative.
And the content itself was tailored to this image of progress.
Explicitly. Meticulously crafted, even. The narrative was all about showing Pakistan as modern, capable, moving forward. And they did this by focusing on tangible symbols, things you could see.
Like what? What specifics do the sources mention?
Big infrastructure projects were heavily featured. You'd see coverage of massive new dams being built, ribbon cuttings at new factories, modern industries starting up.
Real symbols of nation building.
Absolutely. And it all fed into this overarching campaign they called the Decade of Development.
Okay, I've heard of that. It wasn't just an economic plan then, it was a media strategy.
It was both. The economic plan provided the substance, but the media strategy turned it into the central narrative. Every new road, every factory wasn't just infrastructure. It was presented as proof.
Proof of the narrative.
Proof that Pakistan was transforming, becoming modern, disciplined, under strong, effective leadership. It was about building national pride, confirming that trajectory towards, a powerful future.
And because the state controlled PTV and Radio Pakistan?
They controlled the narrative. Almost completely. There wasn't really space for counter-narratives to gain traction, not in the mainstream media anyway. If PTV showed progress, that was the reality for most people consuming the media.
So what's the big takeaway, the early lesson learned from this Ayub era?
The lesson, according to our sources, was pretty clear. Media builds national prestige, serious prestige, when it's tightly aligned with a unified national vision.
Control the channels, control the perception.
Essentially, yes. Control translates into national self-perception, and that perception projects strength internationally. Media was the tool for forging unity around this idea of development and progress.
It sounds almost quaint now, doesn't it, given today's media environment? Imagine having that level of message control.
It's staggering. Strategically, it seems much simpler. But, was it sustainable? How effective was it really in the long run, relying purely on that centralized control?
Yes, the question, isn't it?
And that's where history gives us perspective. It worked then because the challenge was mainly production and distribution, getting the message out.
But the weakness.
It relied on excluding other voices, other viewpoints. The moment technology or society opened up even a crack for different perspectives.
That carefully constructed image becomes vulnerable.
Exactly. That singular narrative built on control is fragile. It doesn't handle dissent well.
Okay, so Ayub's era teaches the power of controlled messaging and focusing on modernization, on tangible progress. But the next big figure, General Zia-ul-Haq, he takes things in a completely different direction. The whole substance of the national image changes, right?
A massive pivot from secular development to defining the nation through ideology.
That contrast is fascinating. It shows how adaptable these strategies had to be.
Absolutely. If the 60s were about building the material state, the late 70s and 80s under Zia were about defining its ideological soul.
Okay, let's dive into that shift.
Yeah.
General Zia-ul-Haq. We move away from dams and factories as the primary message.
And move towards faith, ideology. The sources show Zia using state media very deliberately to recast Pakistan's identity, the new narrative. Pakistan as the fortress of Islam.
A fundamental redefinition of national purpose.
Completely. The media focus shifts. It's less about purely celebrating infrastructure, although that didn't vanish, and more about emphasizing Islamic identity, a moral framework, ideological purity.
And this wasn't just an internal rebranding, was it? It had direct strategic implications, especially regarding Afghanistan.
Absolutely. This redefinition was crucial for mobilizing domestic support for Pakistan's involvement in the Afghan jihad against the Soviets.
How was that conflict framed internally? Through PTV, through Radio Pakistan?
It was framed meticulously, not as a simple geopolitical conflict, not as a proxy war, though strategically it was that too. Domestically, it was presented as a sacred duty, a religious obligation.
Wow, a sacred duty. That elevates things considerably.
It does. The messaging tapped into existing religious and cultural beliefs. State media, PTV programming, radio shows, even cultural events started highlighting themes of spiritual commitment, sacrifice for faith, protecting Islamic values from, the godless communist threat.
That's incredibly powerful framing. It moves beyond policy debate into the realm of moral imperative.
Right. It taps into deep emotions, potentially inspiring a level of unity and commitment that just talking about strategic interests might not achieve.
So the domestic lesson here is the sheer power of ideology and narrative building. It can turn state policy into something perceived as a national, even divine destiny.
It creates that moral imperative, yes. But here's where it gets really complex, because while they were pushing this fortress of Islam, sacred duty narrative at home,
they needed a completely different story for the rest of the world, particularly the West.
Exactly. That's the tightrope walk of the Zia-era media strategy. Two very different narratives running simultaneously.
How on earth did they manage that? How do you project sanctity and jihad domestically while projecting strategic partnership internationally without the whole thing collapsing?
Extreme message discipline, compartmentalization, and very careful targeting of audiences.
Okay, break that down.
Domestically, they needed the religious fervor to get volunteers, resources, and maintain internal cohesion for the Afghan effort. That's the fortress of Islam narrative.
Got it.
But internationally, especially when talking to Washington, to NATO allies, the people providing the money and the weapons.
She can't exactly lead with sacred duty.
Not in the 1980s Cold War context, no. So the international narrative, conveyed through diplomatic channels, English language media briefings, interviews given to Western journalists, was completely different.
What was that message?
Pakistan, the crucial, indispensable frontline state against Soviet expansionism. The messaging focused on shared security interests, geopolitical stability, the strategic necessity of stopping communism. It was purely geopolitical realpolitik.
So two different scripts for two different audiences delivered to different channels. PTV speaks one language at home.
While diplomatic cables and press releases for the international community speak another, they had to be masters of selective communication.
It sounds incredibly difficult to sustain. What were the risks?
Huge risks. Constant balancing act. Our sources emphasize this. If the international narrative, the pragmatic, secular, anti-communist one, leaked too much domestically and seemed too compromising,
It could undermine the religious mobilization. People might ask, wait, are we fighting for faith or just for geopolitical advantage?
precisely.
Yeah.
But conversely, if the domestic religious rhetoric, the fortress of Islam stuff, became too loud on the international stage.
It could alienate the very Western partners they needed. It could scare them off.
Exactly. So it required rigorous, continuous management to keep those narratives separate but effective in their respective spheres.
That coordination must have been immense. How successful was this dual strategy, ultimately? Did it work?
Well, in terms of achieving the immediate strategic goal, securing Western aid and support, while also mobilizing domestically, the sources suggest it was actually highly successful in the short to medium term.
It stabilized things during a very risky period.
Yes. It arguably secured Pakistan's external position during the peak of the Cold War confrontation in Afghanistan. So the lesson learned was profound. Ideology can sanctify struggle and build unity, but
There's a but.
it requires a really sophisticated, almost schizophrenic narrative architecture if you need to manage contradictory messages for different audiences simultaneously.
It really highlights ideology as a powerful lever in communication. And maybe, for you listening, it's worth thinking about national campaigns today. Are they just presented as practical policies?
Or is there an attempt to frame them as something more, a moral cause, a historical necessity? That ideological layer, that's the Zia-era playbook potentially still in use.
Okay, so after the ideologically charged Zia era, we move into a period defined by massive technological shifts. The late 90s, early 2000s, General Pervez Musharraf's time.
Right. And this transition is marked by two huge things. The media revolution, cable news, early internet, and then, bam, the geopolitical earthquake of 9/11.
The game completely changes. The old model of relatively controlled state media, even the careful dual narrative of Zia, just couldn't cope with the speed and reach of 247 global news.
Not even close. Especially after 9/11, Pakistan's global image was suddenly under intense, often negative scrutiny. It was an existential crisis for the national narrative.
So the immediate need was defense, image defense.
Rapid defense, traditional diplomacy, press releases way too slow. The narrative was being shaped in real time on screens around the world. So our sources show Musharraf adopting a very different strategy.
Which was?
Direct engagement, mastering the new global media platforms himself.
So not relying on the Foreign Office spokespersons or state media heads nearly as much.
Much less. This was about the leader becoming the chief communicator. The strategy involved General Musharraf appearing directly, frequently on the big international stages. CNN, BBC, major outlets in the US, UK, Europe.
Why was that seen as necessary?
Because Pakistan's story, its position on terrorism, its intentions, its reliability as an ally, was being questioned, sometimes attacked, constantly. He needed to get out there, in person, on those influential platforms to counter it immediately, to tell Pakistan's side of the story himself.
It's a huge shift in communication style for that kind of leadership role, isn't it?
Right.
Bypassing the traditional filters.
A massive pivot. The idea was, in a crisis, the leader needs to be the face and the voice. You can't wait for the bureaucratic machinery. You speak directly to global decision makers, and just as importantly, to the Western public who influence those decision makers.
What were the advantages of that direct approach?
Speed, obviously. Getting your message out almost instantly to counter negative spins, but also projecting an image of control. A leader confidently engaging with tough questions on global television can seem reassuring, stable.
But surely there are risks. Going directly on to, say, CNN to announce or defend policy, doesn't that ruffle feathers within the traditional diplomatic corps? Seems like you could easily misspeak or create unintended consequences.
Oh, absolutely a calculated risk. High stakes. You could definitely make a mistake, create diplomatic friction. But the judgment call, clearly, was that the speed and directness needed to control the narrative in that specific post-9/11 crisis outweighed the risks of internal friction or procedural niceties.
So stabilization of the international narrative was priority number one.
That seems to be the case, yes, overriding other concerns.
Okay, but while Musharraf is mastering the international stage, appearing on Larry King Live or whatnot,
Yeah.
something else is happening back home, isn't it? A paradox.
A huge paradox, and absolutely crucial to understanding this era. While the leader focused on global outreach, The domestic media scene was exploding.
How so?
Private television channels were licensed and began flourishing inside Pakistan during this period. This was a massive change. Suddenly, you had dozens of channels, top shows, news programs, not controlled by the state.
So the end of the state monopoly on information internally.
Pretty much the beginning of the end, yes. Public debate expanded dramatically. Digital reach within the country started to grow. People were getting news and opinions from a much wider range of sources, many of them critical of the government.
That must have complicated things enormously. You're trying to project a unified, cooperative image internationally.
While at home, you've got a newly unleashed, sometimes very critical domestic media asking tough questions, highlighting contradictions, offering alternative viewpoints. It made maintaining that single coherent narrative much, much harder.
The media was no longer just an asset to be controlled. It was becoming a dynamic, often challenging force in its own right.
Exactly, a competitive space, part of civil society, not just an arm of the state.
So the lesson from the Musharraf era is what? Agility? Directness?
I think it's both. The key insight was that in a globalized 247 news world, leaders need to be prepared to speak directly, use the latest platforms, and be fast. Bypass old channels if needed, especially in a crisis.
But with a major caveat.
A huge caveat. That direct global strategy now had to contend with a newly empowered, much more complex and often critical private media landscape back home. The era of easy, top-down narrative control, definitely over.
Which brings us right up to the present day. If Musharraf dealt with the rise of 247 cable news, the current environment under Field Marshal Syed Asim Munir is defined by something even faster, more fragmented.
Absolutely. We're talking social media, hyperpartisanship, digital platforms dominating information flow. The speed and complexity have increased by orders of magnitude.
It's gone from a 24-hour news cycle to maybe a 24-second attention span cycle.
Something like that. And the sources identify the new front lines very clearly. It's not just about influencing CNN anymore. It's about platforms like Twitter, now ex-YouTube, and significantly, TikTok.
TikTok, really, as a strategic battlefield.
That's what the material suggests. These aren't just places for entertainment. They are explicitly described as the battlefields of perception now. The challenges are immense anonymity, disinformation, deepfakes, coordinated campaigns. The sheer volume of content, it dwarfs what previous leadership faced.
So the strategy has to adapt yet again. What's the focus now? The sources mention two key areas.
Right. It seems to be a two-pronged approach. First, there's a proactive focus on economic diplomacy, particularly related to the SIFC.
Okay, SIFC, the Special Investment Facilitation Council. Remind us briefly what that is.
Essentially, it's a high-level body set up to fast-track foreign investment into key sectors: IT, agriculture, energy, mining, trying to cut through red tape and make Pakistan more attractive to international capital.
And why is the military leadership involved in the digital narrative around an economic initiative? That seems like a job for the Commerce Ministry.
Because in today's environment, particularly for attracting large-scale foreign investment, the narrative is stability. Investors need confidence. They need to believe in security, predictability, long-term political cohesion.
And the perception is that the military can guarantee that stability better than civilian bodies alone.
That seems to be the underlying premise driving the communication strategy. So the digital effort focuses relentlessly on projecting that image. Pakistan is stable, secure, open for business, and the SIFC is making things happen efficiently. The military's backing is presented as a guarantee.
What does that look like online? What kind of content are we talking about?
It's quite sophisticated, apparently. Highly targeted narratives. You see polished videos showcasing successful projects, graphics explaining streamlined processes, photos of high-level meetings with foreign investors or delegations.
Distributed where?
Across multiple platforms. Slick short-form videos for TikTok and Instagram Reels. Targeted posts on X aimed at business communities, perhaps LinkedIn, content pushed out on YouTube. The goal is constant positive reinforcement, to build a digital firewall of economic confidence.
Okay, so that's the proactive economic push. What's the second strategic focus?
That's the defensive side, confronting what the sources term hybrid warfare.
Hybrid warfare. That term gets used a lot. What does it mean in this specific digital context?
Here, it refers to the deliberate use of digital tools and tactics by adversaries, state or non-state, to undermine Pakistan's stability. Things like spreading disinformation, running coordinated troll farms to manipulate online conversations, manufacturing fake controversies, seeding narratives designed to sow division or panic.
So it's not just about putting out good news anymore. It's about actively fighting back against digital attacks.
Exactly. The counter strategy is about building information resilience. This means having mechanisms for rapid debunking of fake news, identifying and trying to neutralize hostile disinformation networks, and actively working to prevent platforms like X or YouTube from being completely overwhelmed by destabilizing narratives.
Goal B.
To project national resilience and unity online, to maintain coherence even when the environment is saturated with attempts to create chaos and fragmentation.
This evolution, from state TV broadcasting development projects to fighting digital hybrid warfare, it leads to a really striking conclusion in the source material. And let's spend a moment on this because it's a big claim.
It is. The material argues that narrative power, the ability to control and shape the information space, is now considered strategically as decisive, as vital as possessing nuclear weapons.
Wow. Narrative as decisive as nuclear power. Unpack that. What does that comparison even mean?
It fundamentally changes how you think about communication. It's not PR anymore, it's national security at the highest level. The idea is that a successful, well-targeted digital attack, a massive disinformation campaign, for example, could potentially cripple a nation's economy, destroy investor confidence, cause widespread social unrest, or paralyze government function.
Achieving strategic goals without firing a shot.
Precisely. Faster, cheaper, and sometimes more devastatingly than conventional military action. If you lose control of your national narrative in the digital age, the consequences can be catastrophic. It can undermine the very cohesion needed for the state to operate effectively.
So a failure in narrative defense is seen as potentially equivalent to a major security failure on a physical level.
That seems to be the implication. It forces leaders to view their communication infrastructure and strategy not just as a support function, but as a core pillar of national defense architecture.
We're talking about digital deterrence then.
That's a good way to put it. Just like nuclear weapons are meant to deter a physical attack, a strong, resilient national narrative strategy, backed by sophisticated counter-hybrid capabilities, is meant to deter or defeat information attacks.
Which implies continuous, significant investment in digital capabilities, monitoring, analysis, rapid response, content creation.
Massive investment, elevating digital strategists and information warriors to the same level of importance as traditional defense planners.
Reflecting on this whole journey, Ayub Khan's single-state radio station broadcasting development news to this. A complex, multi-front digital war requiring doctrines of resilience and deterrence. The definition of media itself has just exploded.
It really has. From a simple tool for transmission to this vast, contested, often hostile landscape, it shows how power itself shifts and adapts alongside the technologies that mediate our understanding of the world. The control Ayub had through scarcity is gone. Now it's about navigating, surviving, and trying to shape the narrative with an overwhelming abundance and potential chaos. #, conclusion, comparative reflection.
It's been quite a journey through these different eras. Let's try and synthesize this a bit. Comparing the four periods really throws the evolution into sharp relief.
Yeah, the tools changed, the global context changed, the domestic media landscape changed radically. But that core mission, protecting the national story, projecting strength, that thread remains remarkably consistent.
So, quick recap. Ayub Khan.
Foundation building. Centralized state media, radio, PTV. Narrative focus, discipline, progress, modernity. Key tool, absolute control.
Then Zia-ul-Haq.
Ideological pivot. Fortress of Islam domestically, frontline state internationally. Key tool, faith-based messaging, dual narratives, state media plus careful diplomacy.
Musharraf era.
Crisis communication in the age of global news. Mastering platforms like CNN, BBC, leader as direct communicator. Key tool, global media outreach. Navigating the rise of domestic private media.
And the current period under Asim Munir.
The digital battleground. Focus on economic diplomacy, SIFC, and counter and hybrid warfare. Key tools. Social media, X, YouTube, TikTok, digital resilience, narrative as national security.
4 distinct strategies, 4 different technological contexts, but one single unwavering objective across all those decades.
Safeguard the image. Defend the story. Control the narrative against all pressures, internal and external.
It really underscores the power of storytelling on a grand national scale, doesn't it?
Absolutely. These weren't just policy communications. They were attempts to craft and sustain epic narratives. Stories of faith under Zia, stories of resilience post 9/11, stories of inevitable progress and modernization from Ayub onwards. The underlying message, adapted but always there, is one of strength, unity, and destiny.
And our sources explicitly link that destiny to achieving, quote, next world superpower status. That goal seems to thread through all these communication efforts.
That consistency of ambition, irrespective of the challenges, is quite striking when you look at it across the decades covered in the material. Hashtag, tag, tag, outro.
So where does this leave us? We started with the idea that in today's world, image is strength.
And this deep dive really seems to confirm that. What we've traced is a constantly evolving communication strategy, always adapting to use the most effective tools of the time, whether that's a broadcast tower or a social media algorithm, to define and defend the national brand.
And that adaptation clearly isn't over. The current focus on SIFC narratives and countering hybrid threats shows this is an ongoing, intensifying strategic requirement.
Which leads us to a final thought, something for you, our listener, to maybe chew on after we finish.
Go ahead.
If that ultimate goal, stated in the source material becoming a next world superpower, is genuinely the objective,
Okay.
and if, as we've discussed, narrative control is now seen as strategically equivalent to nuclear power,
Right, the big claim.
then what does that really imply? What are the inescapable requirements for any nation with such ambitions today?
You mean in terms of communication strategy?
Exactly. Doesn't it imply a need for massive, continuous investment in achieving and maintaining near-total digital presence, dominance in narrative control, an integrated communication strategy that permeates every aspect of statecraft?
If losing the information war is truly seen as a strategic security failure on par with the military defeat,
Then defending the information sphere, shaping the narrative proactively, becomes arguably one of the highest national priorities, demanding resources and strategic focus on an unprecedented scale.
the implications are huge, not just for Pakistan, but for any nation trying to assert itself on the global stage today. Every tweet, every video, every online trend potentially becomes part of that geopolitical struggle.
It's a battle being fought constantly, often invisibly, right there on the devices in our pockets.
Sobering thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a really complex and evolving story.
Always fascinating to explore the sources and unpack these big themes. Thanks for having me.